Hello and welcome to Things Musicians Don't Talk About with your hosts Hattie Butterworth
and me, Rebecca Toll.
Within our vibrant musical world, it can often feel that the struggles and humanity of musicians is lost and restricted.
Having both suffered in silence with mental, physical and emotional issues, we are now looking for a way to voice musicians' stories, discuss them further and to connect with the many others who suffer like we have.
No topic will be out of bounds as we're committed to raising awareness for all varieties of struggle.
So join me, Hattie and guests as we attempt to bring an end to stigma by uncovering the things musicians don't talk about.
Things Musicians Don't Talk About is supported by the Royal Society of Musicians. Since 1738, they have been providing vital financial assistance, advice and guidance to music professionals unable to work due to accident, illness, stress or anxiety. Whether you're working as a performer, administrator, technician or teacher, and everything in between, they're there to help. If you know of someone in need, you can contact them in confidence by visiting their website, which is www.rsmgb.org, or you can contact them by ringing 020 7629 6137. Support their work by becoming a member or donating today.
Welcome back to our first episode in a while. We've had a bit of a break from the podcast, but lots of things have actually been going on behind the scenes, which were due to be announced very soon and have been really exciting. But it's great to come to you today, be back with this conversation we had with Ruth Philips. Ruth is primarily a cellist and she studied at the Yehuda Menuhin School, but now she is also a writer, a performance coach and meditation teacher, and is the most fantastic human being. We had such a brilliant conversation with Ruth, and it was actually a very transformative experience for me to talk with her and have the experience to interview her and ask all the questions I was dying to ask about performance anxiety, you know, the lies we tell ourselves in the practice room. We also go on to talk about practice as a self-harm mechanism, and we talk a bit about violent language and the ways that we've been brought up within this musical industry to treat ourselves with, less kindness than we deserve. But Ruth is just such a relatable, brilliant, down-to-earth person. She has huge depth to her work, but she is also incredibly funny and really amazing company. So really, really thrilled to share this one with you. And I hope you're all having a fantastic week so far. Welcome, Ruth Philips, to Things Musicians Don't Talk About. It is so wonderful to be here with you today over Zoom. Tell us, where are you joining us from this morning?
I'm in the south of France, over the vineyards. It's really very tough life.
Oh, wow. How long have you been based there? Because I guess you're from the UK originally.
I've been here living about just over 20 years, actually.
You sent us a really touching email, and I was looking back on the email thread and I was like, this is embarrassing because it was almost a year ago now.
Exactly 11 months today.
But sort of wanting to connect, and I'd actually heard of your work for many years. I'd read your kind of blog series that was part of the Cello Bello Paul Katz blog, which I feel like most cellists will have heard of or know about. And it felt like a really amazing space that you had online that didn't really exist before you, where you were just sort of bringing a perspective on performance anxiety and cello, holistic cello experience, I guess, that didn't really exist before. So you are a cellist, both modern and Baroque cello, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And can you tell us a bit about how, you know, your sort of early life with the cello, and then how this space came about of creating somewhere to help people with performance anxiety?
Yeah, of course. First of all, I just want to say how wonderful the work you're doing, and really express my appreciation for that. before we start.
Thank you.
Yeah, I went to, I started playing when I was 4. I'm going to do a little potted version. And I went to the menu in school. I basically suffered from such terrible stage fright that I left my studio when I did my recital, my final recital in America. I studied in New York. When I did my recital in America, I left my studio as I wanted it to be found when I died. That is how scared I was. I literally didn't think I was going to survive. And so I sort of came from that. But at the same time, there are also lots of extraordinary, amazing, connected and transcendent experiences along the way, as most of us have, which keep us going with chamber music, and quite a long time with the Chamber Orchestra of Europe, which was amazing, working with harmonicorps. And so it was a mixed bag really, but there was something not right. And in order to go on, I think you've mentioned this on quite a few of your, or other people have, that feeling that you're looking at somebody playing and they seem to be enjoying themselves. And you think, how can that be? How can they be enjoying themselves? I think the thing about, we love what we do. We absolutely love music, but something gets blocked. And I became more and more interested in what was blocking that love. Because once we get on stage, well, I speak for myself, I did not love being on stage. But I could see people that did, and I didn't understand it. Like many people who go into a sort of holistic approach, I had an injury and other things. My cello got smashed up. I won't go into that massively. Various things were smashed up along the way, which opened a space for the question really, which I hadn't ever asked myself, was, do I want to do this? I was very surprised that the answer was yes, actually. I didn't expect the answer to be yes. That was pretty much the beginning.
So your journey into holistic experiences was through trying to figure out your own personal journey rather than specifically trying to help others first. It was more of a self-healing process.
Absolutely. I think that's in most cases probably because otherwise you can't help anybody else if you haven't helped yourself. So I think, yeah, when we talk about performance anxiety and things, I think it's really helpful if you know that the person in front of you helping you knows exactly how you feel. Well, not exactly, but it's as you've said many times, and it's being talked about a lot more now, but there was a period when it wasn't mentioned at all.
I'm really curious to go back to New York, and you say you were age 29, I think, when this experience happened, and you arranged your studio as if you how you wanted it to be found after your death, which it's a really brave thing to admit to. And I think I read it and was sort of I so understood that, but I couldn't have put that into words for myself about how some performances have felt for me as well. Can you tell us about the experience straight after that? How did you kind of go age 29 from that experience?
It wasn't linear. Those things are never linear. I mean, there were all circles going around. I was working and I was enjoying working, and that will have experience like that, a little lodge somewhere. And I'd say that the impact of that experience is still somehow playing out. I mean, it was in New York that I got through that, I would say. It was my teacher in New York that I got through that. And there were two my teacher was amazing, and Tim Eddy, I shall name him because he is worth naming. He taught me abandon. He taught me how to let my body just do what it's doing without controlling every single millisecond. That was amazing. I was so terrified of throwing my arm out because I literally didn't think it would come back. Like I literally didn't think that I'd survive the concert, so that approach to the instrument was just amazing. It was completely liberating. He also gave me unconditional love, and I don't think I'd ever really had it before from a teacher. And I think he taught me a language of kindness towards myself. So it wasn't that I had this experience and then I went back, and then I think I had the experience because I was ready to have it because I felt safe enough. We don't really know. Do you know what I mean?
Because I imagine the attitude towards holistic mindfulness, and especially within music, was much different from the way it's viewed now. Do you think there has been a shift in the attitudes towards holistic recovery and practices from when you started?
Yes, definitely. I think where it's changing is with the young musicians such as yourselves who are actually speaking about it and talking to people about it. I think in general, I would say that the education, the people who are teaching is somewhat behind so far. But I think that's partly the institutional pressures and the exam systems and what's expected of a music career, and there's so much set up in even before the teacher comes along that the teacher has to somehow make happen. I do think things are changing. There are a lot of teachers now, young teachers now coming up who are much, much more rounded, who treat the whole person. I mean, for me, practice is, I went swimming, I go swimming every morning. That's my cello practice, that's cello practice, that's practice. I think that what's interesting is what do we practice and how do we practice? That's what really interests me. I think I certainly came from a world where you were told that you had to practice 7 hours a day, but nobody seemed to care what you did in that time. No, you can spend 7 hours a day telling yourself you're awful and that was wrong and you're bad and being incredibly cruel to yourself and getting more and more tense and repeating more and more tense movements. But so long as you've done 7 hours of it, that's fine. So I think we're moving away from that world. And I think the world of spending 15 minutes just attending to the mind, making space in the mind, making space in the body, are starting to be considered as important parts of the practice that leads us to be available when we're performing.
How do you deconstruct this fear of and this sort of obsession with numbers as a string player? And how do you move from that really rigid version of practice into a more trusting sort of way of looking at it? Because I think even now, when you say that swimming is part of your cello practice, there's part of me that's like, there's part of a younger me that's really scared that's how is that going to help my final recital? How can it feels like every moment with the cello, it was a reassurance for me of, that this is going to help my final recital, whereas everything else might not. I feel in control here. Maybe I don't feel as in control if I'm on a walk or whatever.
I feel that we overrate control. I think that what the problems that I've found in my own playing and then since as a teacher are that we do not practice rest. We do not practice letting go. I feel that we could be letting go at least and doing nothing 50% of the time and resting and being responsive and available. If you look at the breath, for example, there's in breath and there's out breath. And if you breathe in too much, you die. Or if you breathe out, you die, right? It's always a balance between taking in and letting go. And I feel that a strange attitude to control that is equivalent to constantly breathing in. And that we almost never practice the other part of it, which is the breathing out. So when I say I'm going swimming, I'm interested in mapping the whole body. I'm interested in mapping the mind so that when I sit with my instrument, I bring my whole self in the present moment. I bring 100 million stories. I don't bring 100 million habits in my ankle or my left hip. And when I swim, I release those. So I'm practicing releasing habits that I then can sit on the chair with the cello. I can release those habitual biases, if you like. And then when I sit with the cello, I can at least notice, because I have another experience. I have an experience of not having that particular tension. Because I've had that experience, I can then at least notice that I do, when I do have the tension. Whereas if I don't, then I constantly bring the same tensions to my playing. Yoga practice is absolutely crucial for me. I've learned more about playing the cello through my yoga practice than I have possibly through anything else, because I learned that movement happens on release. I learned about breath. I learned about grounding. I learned about the fact that when you breathe out, the spine releases into length, so that I can ground on the inhale through the diaphragm and I can ground on the exhale through the spine lengthening. That's practice for me, because when I'm feeling anxious and I want to create space, I can draw on that experience, not just an idea, but I can draw on that actual experience in my body in that moment to choose another experience other than the habitual moving into anxiety. So yes, I really believe that those things are as important, if not more important, than I can practice. Like I have hardly played the cello recently because I'm writing a book, so I can pick up the cello and it's like riding a bike now. That's because it's not this separate thing from me with this object that is so alien and scary, and it's just part of how I move.
Do you think that this not practicing rest is specific to music, or is it just generally across the way that the world is currently?
I think as a society, the language of allowing and inviting is pretty alien to us. I was just looking up some the origins of words we use often, like strive. I'm going to find it, actually. I have it here. Strive, the word strive, comes from the Old French, which means to quarrel, dispute, resist, and struggle. We strive for excellence and we strive for perfection. And here's another one. A discipline is a small scourge, whip, used as an instrument of penance and flagellation by members of some Christian denominations. I think we use a very violent language with ourselves in general. And I do think that the music profession is, Western classical music, shall we say. The language that we are taught in is quite violent. And we then internalize that language, and that's how we speak to ourselves.
And that feeds into things like the performance anxiety and injuries and everything.
If we speak to ourselves like that, what happens in our body? Do we relax and soften? It's a simple question, really, but because a lot of the time we've learned to practice with our heads and at best our fingers, we're not actually even listening to our bodies. We don't even notice that there's a contraction. I was just working with somebody just now who had a memory of one time where she felt really, really free playing. And she said she felt spacious and she was flowing and she was grounded, and yet there was this beautiful feeling of flowing up, and she was remembering that experience and just really, really registering all those feelings in her body. All she noticed about the experience was that it was good. And then there was the bad experience, which was when she felt very judged. So we went into that, and I tried to get her to remember that experience. And how did she feel in her body, and what was happening? Her breath was short, her heart rate went up, she felt pulled up in her feet, loads of things. Her whole body was contracted and her mind was racing with millions of different thoughts. But we can change that. But the thing is that all she'd done until that point was say one was a good experience and one was a bad experience. Do you see what I mean? Whereas we can, when we get curious about what's happening in the body, and we we mentioned, you know, we speak to ourselves in a violent, I'd say violent because I think it is violent actually, way, or we project that violent speech or onto somebody else, then there's no way we can move freely. But because we actually now have skills, mindfulness, yoga, and that's, you know, or whatever, whichever ones we choose, there are many ways of supporting this. We now have skills, we can bring that space to ourselves. We can actually develop that space and maintain that space and practice that space. So when I practice, one of the things I really need to practice is knowing, maintaining, developing that softness and spaciousness. And I think there's some kind of idea that that's kind of like weak or pathetic or giving up or not working hard enough, or there's another one, hard, work hard. Our language is so interesting, isn't it? You must work hard. Why can't we say, I must work soft? That would be good, wouldn't it?
Oh.
Or I'm just gonna
I'm really interested in, and I have been for a long time now, in this kind of self-harm rhetoric around practice. And that was definitely where it was in my life, was a way of, I guess, making me feel, I don't know, I felt a strange euphoria in beating myself up, which is, you know, quite a sad thing to say. But I think often if you're having trouble with a teacher, or, you know, difficulty in your life in other ways, often having a sort of rigid, intense, painful practice regime in a weird way is a kind of form of self-soothing. I don't know if I'm completely talking in.
No, it's very interesting what you say. Not at all.
How do you move into like really committing to kindness to yourself? Because I think a lot of us have been brought up with just believing that we aren't good enough, and actually beating ourselves up in practice is the only way to feel any sense of, you know, accomplishment.
Yeah, it's a really brilliant question. I want to go back to what you said about the self-soothing, and it reminds me of the kind of, it's a sense of, it's like cutting, isn't it? We use it like that. I really hear you, and I think that that's very, very common. And thank you for naming it. In those kinds of things, what we're trying to do is numb the pain. And the pain of, usually, not always, but some of the pain is of lack of self-worth, of shame. We don't want to feel those things. So I think that's why we beat ourselves up, and we go back to the word discipline, which is basically self-flagellation. And that's what we do. We beat ourselves, we literally whip ourselves. And I think that's a really good point. The kindness is when we meet the pain with kindness. Instead of in mindfulness, you're encouraged to meet everything with kindness, everything that arises. And if, first of all, what arises, we need to feel it. And because quite often it's a bit much, we numb out is one way of dealing with it. So like, that could look like we're watching telly whilst we're practicing, or actually that can be quite fun sometimes if you're just, I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but there are ways of kind of numbing out when we're practicing, right? Well, as we know that addiction and alcoholism are quite serious problems in the, laughing aside, that is actually quite a serious problem. And other ways are self-harm. So when we feel the lack of self-worth, and when we feel the shame, and when we feel these things, first of all, we're not alone. And these are very natural human feelings. So our first reaction is to either push them away, or and then we identify with them, say, I am, rather than this is a feeling that is arising. I am ashamed. I am not worth anything. So we've identified. So we have the choice to not identify, to acknowledge what's coming up, and to meet it with kindness. That's quite a process, but it's a practice. And again, a very useful practice for musicians, which is not considered practice because we're not playing our 7 hours of scales. In the mindfulness training, there's a practice called RAIN, which is a beautiful practice for such emotions as would lead us to that kind of behavior, where it's called, it's an acronym: recognize, allow, investigate. And there are 2 parts to the N, which I think are quite interesting. The first one is nurture, i.e. give yourself kindness. And the second part is non-identification. When we feel those feelings, we really have to give them space.
I really wish so many of my colleagues would listen to this, because I get the sense that a lot of them do what they think is self-soothing, which is basically numbing or self-harming in some way. I don't know, unkindness or drinking or overworking or whatever it is. And they think it's self-soothing because it is providing relief from the overwhelming awareness that actually mindfulness requires. I've definitely found it quite overwhelming. As I'm training as a counselor, and I've done therapy. I've been in therapy for so long, and I kind of go through phases of finding out more stuff about myself, which is exhausting. It's really a lot to live with, especially if you're new to it. And I think a lot of people, I have a couple of friends, a couple of male colleagues in particular, who have recently started going to therapy or started more of a holistic practice, and they are shocked by how overwhelming it is. And I wonder, when you were starting your journey into mindfulness and holistic practice, did you find that letting go of those violent ways of talking to yourself and numbing out and all of these forms of self-harm, was it a lot to let go of?
I think it's very, very gradual. I think that there was a part in our training where we were dealing particularly with compassion. And I set myself metta, which is loving kindness practice. I don't know whether you've heard of that, but where you send kind wishes to yourself and to another, and then to a neutral person, and then to, it's a very interesting practice. In the West, we actually find it very difficult to start with ourselves because we have so much self-hatred. So what we do in the West, with this practice, we start by imagining somebody who you find very, very easy to love, to warm up the heart, and then you bring it back to yourself, and then you find. So it's a practice where you send loving wishes, and it sounds really kind of a bit crass, and it can be quite awkward. And I did this every morning. I made myself do it every morning for a month, this practice. And I cannot tell you, that month changed my life. Absolutely changed my relationship with my parents, both of whom I lost that year. So it was good timing. And it changed my relationship with my playing. I mean, this is only last year. So it's a really ongoing journey. Yeah, I think it's, I think the practice is just ongoing in various forms, and that was a big stepping point for me, that particular practice. Yoga was probably the first time I began to be kind towards and listen to my body. That was 30 years ago when I started doing that. I think we can't really think we're going to fix it all in like with one thing and in one, we have moments of revealing levels of healing, I think. And the love in the Buddhist practice, they talk about the Brahma Viharas. They're called the heart practices, which I am absolutely kind of obsessed with. When I did my training, I did my practical exam with a group of musicians working on the heart practices, and how does this affect the way we practice, and particularly our relationship with our audience. And they are kindness, compassion, shared joy, and the last one is equanimity. And they're practices, you know. If we go on stage and we have no experience of any of these practices, how are we supposed to not think the audience is judging us? And how are we supposed to be kind to ourselves? They're practices. Like, how are you supposed to get up and play the Dvorak concerto if you haven't practiced it? I think that we underestimate the importance of these things as practices. You know,
I imagine it also practicing showing kindness even internally to others, especially people that maybe you have a difficult relationship with, makes it easier. Because when I hear people talk about mindfulness and holistic practices, I'm like, yeah, I'm totally on board. But I can imagine from an outside perspective, or you must get people being like, oh, that's all well and good, but you know, XYZ, that's very wishy-washy, or how are you supposed to earn a living? I don't know, keep up with capitalism or something.
course.
And it must make it a lot easier to deal with negative comments like that if you're practicing showing self-kindness and external kindness, even without having the conversations.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that as musicians, the question I always get is, well, what about other people's judgments? What about auditions? What about, a good bloody question, right? What about auditions? And we are being judged all the time, and we're not being hired again, or we're being fired, or we're just like being ghosted, or it is a constant in our lives as musicians. And so it's all very wishy-washy. Well, what about? But this is exactly what about, because we do learn to accept and understand. When we learn to understand our own judgments, A as just thoughts, B as coming from suffering. If I make a judgment about you, it comes from my own suffering. It's nothing to do with you. But that's not just an idea. That again, that's a practice. If it's just an idea, it doesn't work. So I can say it now, and unless I practice it through these, that's why the mindfulness practice is so powerful, because it is a practice. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. And do you think that the mindfulness practice and this way of living and working is compatible with the way the industry is currently?
I think it makes it much easier to. I don't think the industry is healthy. It's partly the answer, and I would hope that we could change it from the inside by being more attentive and kind to ourselves. And that sometimes means, as I did a couple of years ago, walking away from a situation which is just too hurtful to myself, even though it was a situation that in some way I was very attached to, a professional situation. And of course we have to earn a living, and we have to pay for the babysitter, and we have to, all of that is very, very real. But the way we are and the way we meet it internally doesn't change it doesn't stop it, or it doesn't stop it happening, but it does stop the way we experience it. And it sometimes gives us the courage, I think, which we need to walk away from situations which are unhealthy to us. And that gives us the strength to walk towards situations and create situations that are healthy, not just for us, but for everybody. Right. So by doing that, we're changing the ripples, if you like. If we want to change the world, which I think we all do in our humble ways. Do you see what I mean? If I'm continuing to be in a situation which is really based on a kind of hierarchy that just makes no sense and doesn't support me in any way, I am not supporting anybody. I'm not just not supporting myself. I'm not supporting anybody. I'm not going forward or helping the world go forward in any way. I'm just supporting a structure that is causing suffering.
I'm really grateful that you've kind of really focused on how this is such a process and is such a long process. But I think what a lot of musicians are looking for with performance anxiety is a quick fix. And I guess my next question is about, okay, maybe you've begun a sort of loving kindness practice or yoga, or you're interested in exploring the beginnings of this new way of working and tolerating anxiety, how do you enter performance situations, and how do you tolerate that those feelings are probably still going to be really intense for you for a while? You know, how do you work with your students or clients on that kind of on the beginning work and just wanting everything to feel different, but it's just not feeling different yet? How do you overcome that, or how do you like accept yourself in those scenarios?
I think the first thing is that you are the person that accepts that person who's probably never been accepted. That's why for teachers it's so important, because we should be the people, like parents, who unconditionally accept our students, whatever they're going through. And that ain't happening very much, I don't think. So if we put that pressure on our students, then that pressure they internalize, and they will put the pressure back on themselves. So I think it starts there. If I'm working with somebody, I do not expect them to change overnight. If I only ask that they are attentive to their experience, and whatever arises is okay. And if, again, you know, there are echoes of that's lazy or that's, but it's just not true. It's just not lazy. Lazy is keeping on going in this cycle of violence and shame and judgment and criticism. That's lazy. So as teachers, I would say that's where it starts, that we need to look at our own inner critics. We need to look at our own judgments and where did they come from. That's quite a painful process, can be. But why don't we want to go on this journey anyway? We've only got one life. I mean, it is a lifetime journey. It shouldn't be expected to be anything else. And then so there's the expectation that every concert has to be some thing of perfection. And there's another myth that we are recreating day after day. We're holding up this myth that perfection is something that we want, when in fact perfection only creates, it just destroys connection, just destroys it.
How much is fixing or healing performance anxiety about deconstructing our beliefs about ourselves, and how much is it about managing physical symptoms, do you think, or are they both at play?
Well, you're very good at the questions, aren't you, Hattie?
I'm just trying to help myself here.
Okay, I always start with the body. There's my favorite story in the Buddhist. I'm terrible at telling stories, so go look it up, but I will try my best. Look up Jack Cornfield telling this story. He's great. He's my mindfulness, the person I trained with. Anyway, the Buddha, right? This guy, the Buddha, Siddhartha, is under the Bodhi tree trying to get enlightened. And there's this figure called Mara, who's the god of evil. Mara sends these 3 challenges to the Buddha. Have you heard this story? No, okay. He sends these 3 challenges. The first is, this is my version. He sends his naked daughters dancing and tempting him with the flesh and everything. And the Buddha's been meditating for quite a bit. He's pretty cool. He's really not, you know, it's nice and all that, but
he's pretty cool.
And he's not drawn into that. The next thing that Mara sends is armies with arrows to shoot at the Buddha. Well, he's not the Buddha yet, actually. He's still Siddhartha. He's on his way. And the Buddha sends loving kindness or awareness or presence back to the arrows, and they turn into petals. Isn't that lovely? That's a beautiful practice.
That's very
anyway,
nice.
Very nice. But easier said than done, I imagine. The third thing that Mara sends, and this is the big one, he sends his biggest number. He sends doubt. And that's where That's the hardest one. And what the Buddha does is he leans over and he touches the earth, and he asks the earth to bear witness to his right to be there, to attain enlightenment, but to be there. He touches the earth. And I love this story because it is, for me, it's so humble. It's just like, yes, I have a right to be here in this body, on this earth. Just standing here is enough. Do you know what I mean? I find that story just blows me away. And when I start with the body, it's because this is where we start. We learn to feel safe. And many of us have found ways, well, we've had experiences, some traumatic, some just, as we've spoken about, cruel. Lots of teaching is very cruel. We've come away from the earth. When we're anxious, we pull ourselves away from the earth, don't we? I mean, how many of us know that movement, right? That movement upwards, away from the earth, because we don't feel safe. We don't feel like we have a right to be here. We don't feel like we belong. And that feeling is something we can learn through the body. And it is not something we can learn through the head. The body is the first place, and in mindfulness of the body and mindfulness of the breath are the first instructions, always. So when we say, you know, what are you doing? I'm doing yoga. Well, go and do your practice. I am practicing being here, you know.
It made me really emotional. It feels, why does it feel so revolutionary to be told that you are allowed to be here and that you have worth, you know, being here? But it really hit me hearing that, actually. So thank you for sharing that story. And you are a storyteller.
Yes.
It was a lovely story to hear.
I probably got it all wrong. That's the problem. But
no, doesn't matter. I felt it.
Good. If you felt it, that's good.
Exactly. I really would love to hear about the work that you do at the moment. And I know you run these beautiful courses, which seem to be completely different from every other music course I attended growing up.
Lucy Russell and I trained together. She's the first violinist in the Fitzwilliam Quartet, and she and I did the mindfulness training together. So we worked together, and we're running a course at Benslow. And then in August, between the 2nd and the 4th of August, I'm running a course which is really interesting. There's just a bunch of people who are really, really committed to this, but also forming a community. I don't know about you, but I don't like working alone. I believe in community. I think we need to be together, and we could either just say, well, body mapping's the only way, or yoga's the only way, or like, you know, or we can come together with our shared commitment to helping musicians get well, or at least not musicians necessarily, but the music world. And so there's a bunch of us who are really committed to that, and there's Alison Wells and Astis Valdemarsdottir, who's a violist, who are doing body mapping. My very good friend Dale Culliford as well, she's a cellist in the Halle, she's doing Alexander technique, and I'm doing what I do, which is kind of mindfulness, breath, whatever. And so we're doing that in Glasgow through the Conservatoire. And I think the nice thing is that when you start looking around, well, you know, because you're talking to all these people, if we start dividing and then we won't do it. But if we come together and we actually share our commitment to this and are not obsessed with my way being the right way, or, you know, your way's the wrong way, because we know that gets us into trouble, right? That gets us into wars. And so I think that's very exciting. I think there's a lot of people just joining together now and really showing various parts. You know, if somebody's going to come to one of those weekends, something is going to speak to them, right? It might not be what I say, it might not be what you say, but there will hopefully be one moment that will open a door. And I think that's all we can hope for, because an open door is enough, you know. So
there's something very powerful about giving yourself permission and learning that you have permission to be somewhere. And I think there's something particularly with mindfulness and Buddhist beliefs and yoga, I feel discomfort. I mean, I'm also aware that we are three white women discussing Buddhism on a podcast, of no less. And I wonder how we can apply the same kindness and non-division approach to leaning into Eastern practices.
Well, the practices are absolutely, that's where they come from. And I think the only reason I've searched for other practices the tradition that I trained in is the insight. It's close to the Theravada tradition, and it comes from Thailand and Burma, and it's absolutely solidly recognized as that and coming from that, and that's very clear. And the reason I leaned into that myself was that the place that I was invited to lean into, i.e. our own, let's say, Christian culture, is monotheistic. And as far as my experience of it, and I mean, I'm getting into dodgy territory here, I guess, but there's a lot of judgment, let's put it that way. I think it's beautiful that those practices have come to the West, and I think it's just really important, and it is really important that we always acknowledge where the roots are of those practices. And thank you for reminding me to acknowledge them, which I always do when I run a workshop, actually. And the beauty is they are universal and they belong to everybody. And I think it's like the Dalai Lama, I was telling you about the metta practice, and when we can't start that bit with ourselves because we just hate ourselves so much. And I think it was I can't remember her name now, too old. Anyway, there's a woman a very famous woman who does a lot of loving kindness. It'll come in as soon as I put the thingy down.
It's not Pema Children, is it?
No, not Pema Children.
Okay.
But no,
Kristen or
she's
Kirsten Neff?
Not Kristen Neff either, the other one. She said a story about when she was talking to the Buddha, and not Buddha, she was talking about direct line to the Buddha. She was talking to the Dalai Lama, not bad in itself. And she's talking to the Dalai Lama, and she said, well, Your Holiness, what about self-hatred? And the Dalai Lama said, well, what's that? Because we have, that is our cultural, we have a culture that is absolutely rampant with self-hatred, and that is our particular thing to deal with. So luckily, I think that these practices can really, really help address those and transform those.
Yeah, I can really see like the value in it, and how we've got to change it from the inside out. It's the only way. Talking of self-hatred to self-compassion, I was wondering if we should transition into wins of the week. Does that make sense now?
Yes.
So as you have listened to some of our episodes, you might have come across the fact that we do a win of the week at the end of every episode. So if anybody would like to come to the forefront and proffer their win of the week, speak now.
What is a win of the week? Sorry, I have listened to lots of your podcasts,
No,
but I don't remember a single win of the week.
Yeah, so I think it can be anything that this week has felt like it's had a great meaning in our life, and it can be big or small, just something that's stayed with us, or it's felt like a big achievement in whatever way, or a small achievement. So this week I have just been I feel like I went in therapy last week. I was really talking about the issue I have. I just don't understand what mothering myself could look like, because I feel like that's my next step in healing all of my many issues, is to think about, actually, I don't need to look for mothering from outside. I can mother myself. But I was sat in therapy last week, and I just kept asking my therapist, but how do I, what do I do? But what do I just couldn't imagine mothering myself. And this week, I've just really chimed into all the moments And I've noticed, first of all, the moments where I'm not mothering myself. And that's felt like a really big switch of being like, oh, actually, this is a moment that's not, it doesn't feel mothering. It doesn't feel like I'm caring for myself here. This feels like I'm switching off. And that's felt like such a win, just to be able to notice now. Maybe I'm not at the stage yet of knowing how to mother, but I'm at the stage of knowing what's not that. So that's felt quite like a big turning point in my healing, which is, felt quite amazing.
I love that.
Thank you.
I'd say you deserve a medal for that one.
Thank you. It's
massive. Ruth, do you have one, or would you like me to go?
Oh, I can give you a small one if I think
Go
I
on then.
understand. So yesterday I was swimming in my beautiful pool. I go naked swimming in the naturist pool down the road. And I was swimming, I had the pool all to myself, and it's massive, and it was absolutely beautiful. And I was just loving seeing all the ripples and all the light play, and really in touch with my body and the flow and everything. I was really having a real beautiful, mindful moment. And then somebody else came into the pool. And I noticed, like you noticed, Hattie, when I was not, I noticed how I just got into comparing mind. I just started trying to swim more fast. My movements got really clumsy. I lost my flow. And he wasn't even swimming very close to me. It's a massive pool. There's only 2 people in it. So that, like you, it was a noticing. I just noticed. That was my win of the week.
That is so beautiful. You guys
It's hard to admit that as well. Yeah. It's hard to admit that. Like, I do that too in weird ways.
Especially in swimming.
Oh, you're a swimmer.
It's really hard.
Sometimes. My win of the week is, I've been I think burnt out and overstretched myself for a long time. And in combination with saying no to a few things recently, which shouldn't be that new and that amazing, but still continues to be a challenge. But yesterday I also had my the concert for the end of the brass scheme at the school that I teach at, which is they learn their instruments for a year for free, and it's very lovely. And it's also amazing. There must have been like 30 year 3s to year 5 female brass players learning for a year. It's really, really wonderful. And I just kind of threw myself back to when I was first learning and what I would have wanted from my teachers and what I didn't get, whether it was talking to the young student in a compassionate way, normalizing performance anxiety, just treating them with kindness, but also kind of giving them this platform that wasn't too controlling. Like, I really helped them be organized and feel prepared, but the whole experience was just so lovely, and all of my students seemed really calm, really, like, a couple of them had a few slips and they just seemed to kind of be like, yeah, it doesn't matter, like, we're just having a nice time. And it was just such a rewarding moment in the midst of all this crazy gigging and teaching and all the other things. It felt like I really kind of just focused and concentrated on that hour of their special concert, which they might not even remember in a few years' time. But it was very, very touching, and I was very proud of myself for that.
Oh,
that's beautiful.
So lovely.
So cute.
It says a lot about the space that you've provided for them as well.
Trombone teacher wasn't even there. No, didn't want to. No, it was a beautiful evening.
Oh, great.
I think it's lovely I love your idea of win of the week, because one of the things that we don't do is soak in we just don't soak in those experiences when things are flowing, when things are working, because we have such a negativity bias, and thank you for that practice. That's really lovely.
Oh, well, yeah, I think we just felt very aware that quite often when we go very deep with people, it's quite hard then just to be like, so bye. Do you know what I mean? And it can feel quite overwhelming a lot of the time. And actually, it's nice to feel like we can bring these conversations to a close a bit more, not positively necessarily, but just
Hopefully.
yeah. But on that note, this has been really, I don't know, transformative. Like, it really has. And I'm so grateful that you reached out and have been so supportive of us and listened and also shared everything in the most incredible way. And I just know this is going to be such an incredible resource for a lot of people. So thank you so much, Ruth.
If anybody wanted to explore any of this further and feels like they would like to look into any of these ideas, I'm offering free 20-minute consultations through my website, ruthphilips.com. So please go ahead and book. And I don't think I'll be doing it for that long. So thank you, both of you, for having this conversation. It's so lovely that it's out there and people are talking, and you've made that happen. It's so wonderful. It's really precious. Thank you.